Hello everyone and welcome to today's Mondat webinar in association with Freshingfields Law, covering developments in the anti-corruption and anti-money laundering landscape in Nigeria. My name is Dan Sampaio and I'm joined by the wonderful Fred Intido to take us through today's discussion. Fred is a dual qualified Nigerian and UK solicitor. He has over 2 decades of practical experience in the corporate, commercial, anti-bribery and anti-corruption, energy, litigation, employment and labour, shipping, government, regulatory and compliance practice areas. He has and continues to advise international and local businesses on all aspects of establishing their operations in Nigeria through obtaining all requisite government and regulatory approvals, interfacing with government agencies. Fred was called to the Nigerian bar in 1998 and qualified as a solicitor in England and Wales in 2010. He is also a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Now, before I hand over to Fred to begin the webinar, a housekeeping item. You can submit questions to Fred by typing them into the questions pane of the toolbar on the right-hand side of your page. Fred will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session, but please do reach out after the webinar for any additional information that you may need. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to Fred to begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan, for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all attendees today. It's a delight to have you join today's webinar. So as you might have seen already on the slide that is up, we're looking today at a theme of momentous developments in the anti-corruption and anti-money laundering landscape in Nigeria, a guide for businesses and investors. Aaron, could you please move to the next slide? Thank you. Thank you. So the fact remains again that Nigeria, in spite of all the challenges that it's currently facing, remains an attractive investment destination for a lot of businesses. And for those who were a part of the webinar presentation we had in July, we highlighted in detail some of the reasons why Nigeria continues to be such an attraction for investment and for business. So I'll just run through some of those highlights quickly. One is that Nigeria has abundant resources. Nigeria's resources, it's varied and diverse. It cuts across solid minerals, it cuts across agricultural products, it cuts across what is its major export, which is crude itself. So that itself is indeed such an attraction. So when we talk about Nigeria, we're not only just emphasizing on the oil and gas industry, we also have, like I mentioned, the solid minerals. We have ore, we have tin, we have coal, bitumen, and these are areas that investors do come into when they come to Nigeria. In the agricultural product sector, we have cocoa, we have cashew, we have a whole lot of products in those areas that is also a huge attraction for investors. Now, another reason we highlighted previously why Nigeria is such an attraction for investors and businesses is that there is some measure of political stability in Nigeria. When I say some measure, I do not discountenance the fact that there are pockets of security challenges. There are areas in the northeastern part of the country where terrorists have laid siege for over a decade, plus, and they continue to make sporadic inroads and attacks into some areas. Kidnapping goes on in some parts, of the country. But in terms of the political structure itself, Nigeria is one of the few countries in the West African region, alongside our close neighbor Ghana, that has had some measure of political stability. Nigeria has had a stable democratic government since 1999, which again, it's a good reason why any investor will want to come to Nigeria. There are attractive incentives which the government provides to businesses that are looking to set up here in Nigeria in terms of tax relief, tax incentives, waivers that are provided depending on the sector you intend to invest in. Also, again, another factor is that Nigeria is a free market economy, and although the government in some areas does intervene and is involved, but a lot of things are run largely on the well-known principle of supply and demand. So it's always good for investors to know that there is that flexibility and there is that liberty for them to come. It's a fast-growing economy, and that you know, again, it's understandable when you consider the fact that Nigeria has a huge population, 216 million plus counting, and it is projected that by the year 2050, Nigeria's population will be the third largest in the world, just behind China and India. That again, it's such an attraction for any business that is looking for somewhere to invest. We do have strong banking and financial sector, and that again is, you know, gives investors absolute confidence in coming into the market. We have a lucrative telecommunication, you know, market, and this, you know, has been the case for about 22 years, since 2020, when the telecommunication sector was liberalized and the government removed itself from direct involvement in that particular, you know, sector. And I'd also hinted already at the fact that we have a large consumer market, which is always a key consideration for any investor. Aaron, next slide, please. Thank you. Fine. So I have just spent a few minutes talking about how much incentives and the attraction that is there in Nigeria, and why businesses do come and should come, you know, to Nigeria. But the problem is that the fact that Nigeria itself is blessed with abundant resources, blessed with human capital resources, blessed with all sorts of things in terms of good weather. Nigeria does not have the sort of weather conditions that some regions of the world face as a result of climate change, which is a real issue for us. The very fact of Nigeria's blessings and abundant resources itself has become a sort of double-edged, you know, sword, because that which is supposed to be a basis for it to grow its human capital, to grow its infrastructure, to grow its economy itself, has become the means by which it is even facing some serious existential challenges. And one of these challenges is the challenge of corruption, which we're talking about these today. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. So when we talk about the anti-corruption landscape in Nigeria, anti-money laundering, it is good to state that Nigeria is perhaps one of the few countries that has a lot of regulations, statutes, laws, which has been enacted by different governments over quite, you know, a long period of time to address the perennial and endemic problem of corruption in the society. So if you're going to look at the issue of corruption and how to address it based on legislations, Nigeria is at the very top itself of that particular tree. The United States of America, as some of us in this webinar will know, has the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which has been one of the most effective legislations which the US government has used in fighting corruption by its citizens or corporations that are registered or have, a presence in the United States. They've used this particular legislation to fight corruption in other parts of the world where those businesses do have, operation. The United Kingdom came up in 2010 with a brilliant piece of legislation, the United Kingdom Anti-Bribery, Act, which some, experts have said is perhaps the most stringent piece of legislation on anti-corruption and anti-bribery that has been passed so far. And the European Union has a suite of treaties, policy, directives, to combat financial crimes, corruption, and money laundering. But Nigeria tops this, list with its own legislations that I will just be running through costly in the next slide. Aaron, next slide, please. Thank you. So you will see on the slide just some of the few of the legislations which Nigeria has, which its government has enacted over time in order to address this issue of corruption, the issue of money laundering, the issue of illicit flow of funds into the country, the issue of financing of terrorism. So it's quite a lot. The EFCC Establishment Act 2004, the EFCC happens to be the #1 enforcement agency in Nigeria, which is saddled with the responsibility of implementing and coordinating these several pieces of legislation, which deals with anti-corruption, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery, the stemming of illicit flow of funds into Nigeria, and the prevention of financing of terrorism. Then we have the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences, Act. This particular legislation is much more focused on addressing the issue of corruption, bribery, money laundering within government circle itself, within public offices. So the distinction between the Independent Corrupt Practices Act and the EFCC Act is that the EFCC has a wider remit. It has a wider jurisdiction. It covers both public officials, private individuals, public companies, and private companies. So it is quite extensive in its reach in battling with these issues that we're talking about today. The advanced fee fraud, the money laundering prohibition, act, the miscellaneous offences, act, all those acts still comes within the jurisdiction of what the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission is statutorily charged with the responsibility to address. The Code of Conduct Act, which is the last of these particular slides, deals again with government officials, with public officials, to ensure that there is honesty, there is integrity, there is probity in the handling of government and official matters. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. So again, you see the list just looks as if it is endless. So another piece of legislation is the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Act. Now, what this particular act has done in the last couple of years since it was enacted is to ensure transparency, accountability, probity within the extractive industries sector. Now, when we talk about the extractive industries, our minds go, fundamentally, primarily first to the oil and gas sector. And that is one of the things this particular act has tried to achieve, to ensure that in the conduct of business within the oil and gas sector, that the IOCs who are involved in the businesses, the international oil companies, the multinational oil companies, the indigenous Nigerian oil and exploration production companies are transparent, accountable in their particular activities and their business. The Freedom of Information Act, it's one that ensures that private individuals can go and make requests for information to be provided, supplied by the government on specific issues that the individual is interested in knowing. The Fiscal Responsibilities Act also is another wonderful piece of legislation that tries to ensure that there is transparency, there is accountability, there is probity in dealing with the fiscal matters within the country. Then the other legislations are just typical legislations that the penal code, the criminal code, they're not specialized legislations in themselves, but deal with a wide variety of issues and all that. Then we have the Banks and all the Financial Institutions Act, the Failed Banks, and Financial Malpractices in Bank Acts, and the recently promulgated the Proceeds of Crime Recovery and Management Act. I should spend a few seconds on this particular piece of legislation because what it set out to do within the Nigerian context and within the context of the enforcement of the anti-corruption and anti-money laundering regulations is to ensure that people who are found to have been involved in these crimes, in these offenses, do not just get, they don't have a judgment passed on them, maybe custodial sentence, a prison sentence. They go to prison for 1, 2, 3 years, and then they come back and they're able to access the fruits of their crime and enjoy it. So this particular legislation is focused on ensuring that every benefit, every property, everything that is attributable to the commission of a crime, whether it's from corruption, money laundering related, financing of terrorism, that there is a means by which those properties, monies are forfeited to the government itself. Next slide, please, Aaron. So the question which I asked here, which I'm sure a number of us who are here will obviously be familiar with, is what is corruption? And there is no better way to give this definition of what corruption is by just looking at what the United Nations itself or the World Bank has defined as corruption. And the World Bank is perhaps in the best position than most to be able to tell us what corruption is. So the World Bank defines corruption as the abuse of public office for private gains. Public office is abused for private gain when an official accepts, solicits, or extorts a bribe. It is also abused when private agents actively offer bribes to circumvent public policies and processes for competitive advantage and profit. Public office can also be abused for personal benefit, even if no bribery occurs through patronage. And we cannot gainsay the fact that this World Bank definition is very, apt, is very succinct, it is tacit, and it captures corruption in its multifaceted and, varied textural nuances. So it cuts across every country, every clime, every jurisdiction, and you can break this down into very small components to understand the endemic issue of corruption. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. So we come to some of the momentous developments in Nigeria, because that is what this webinar today it's all about. So Nigeria has this suite of legislations which ordinarily should put us at an advantage or a good point, a vantage point in combating corruption in the country itself, and give that sense of confidence to investors, because what investors and businesses are essentially looking for as a look for areas within which to invest in the various industries and sectors that are open is, are we sure that we will have sufficient guarantees that things will be done lawfully, legally, and where there are infractions of any legislation, that there will be a transparent, efficient means of addressing those infractions. So what happened in Nigeria? Nigeria, as most of you will know, one of its major source of revenue is exportation of crude oil. That it's about 90% of Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings comes from its export of crude oil. Interestingly, sometime in July, the news media became awash with unsettling stories about the increased and intense thefts of crude oil. And it became such a distressing development when the statistics started coming out from the various agencies that are charged with the responsibility of putting this thing out. It became so bad that in a country that is dependent for its foreign exchange earnings, 90% of that from the export of crude itself, is not even able at the point from the data that was provided by the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, which used to be the state-owned oil corporation, formerly known as the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, came out to say that in a particular month in July, the country recorded zero revenue from oil export because the theft of oil had become so rampant and had become so widespread that there was no oil to export from the country, and that indeed was something which came as a shock to the people in Nigeria, that how could this be possible, where spirits or ghosts responsible for breaching the pipelines and the trunks and the crude export terminals, how is it possible that there could be such large-scale theft of a product that is essential to the survival of a country without anyone being the wiser as to what was going on? Corruption clearly was at the bottom of the problem itself, and we will be talking a bit more about this in the next slide. Thank you, Aaron. Next slide, please. So it was like we had crocodiles in the Delta, dancing crocodiles to be very specific, and it brings again to the fore that particular perennial problem, the law of corruption. Corruption, as we no doubt know, it's attractive, and it has this a fascinating and bewitching attraction because of the benefits that those who engage in it, they not only hope to gain, but do actually gain from what they are doing. In the case of Nigeria, as I have no doubt is also obtainable in most parts of the world, is that an organized syndicate, sophisticated that has access to limitless financial resources, and that also has high-level political connections, are behind the problem of the theft of oil, which became such a huge problem in the country, because the fact that these thefts then brought about zero revenue, so to speak, at one particular point, and increasingly the amount of revenue being received by the government was drastically reduced. It then had a ripple effect on the economy. There was then no funds to be able to finance certain capital projects, no funds to be able to finance the budget, which was running into trillions of naira, no funds to sustain a regime of fuel importation and fuel subsidy, which has persisted for such a very long time. All this again, undergirding this problem is the rampant issue of corruption. So you had official government security outfits and apparatuses which were not able to stem the tide of the thefts. The government had to take an unusual step, and the unusual step that the government took in trying to address this problem, a problem which in fact brought Nigeria to the point of international ridicule and embarrassment, was the government had to invite a non-state actor, a former militant leader, to be the one to provide security and surveillance support over the pipelines and trunks where this oil theft had been, happening at. Next slide, please, Aaron. So this slide talks about the murky waters of the Delta. And yes, indeed, because the Niger Delta, for those of you who might understand a bit of the geography of Nigeria, it's where we have the largest concentration of oil and gas within the Nigerian state, or the Nigerian entity. And so the very first drilling operation for oil exploration, where oil was first struck in Oloibiri in the present-day Bayelsa in the 1950s, is in the Niger Delta. So the Niger Delta is the live wire and the lifeblood of the Nigerian economy itself. There has been for several years now a lot of explorations that has been going on in the northern part of the country, in what has become, known as the basins where the former national oil company was carried out exploratory work. And we hear today that they have discovered some, volume of oil. Whether the commercial quantities we do not know, in exact locations we do not know, but the Niger Delta continues to be the centerpiece where Nigeria earns most of its oil revenue from. And so what the government then had to do was to employ a non-state actor who did not have all the facilities, the equipment that the state actors have, that the security architecture of the Nigerian state has, and it is this non-state actor that were able, to a reasonable extent, to begin to identify the various points at which breaches had occurred and from which oil was being stolen and carried off in vessels, not just small vessels, but huge ocean-going vessels. And again, it all points to the fact that corruption itself, when it becomes so entrenched within a system, when it becomes a part of the daily routine of any people or community, it becomes such a very big a problem to deal with. So this is just one instance where there was some sort of there was some visible evidence to show that the problem could be addressed when there is that particular will to do so in this particular context. Next slide, please, Aaron. Draining the swamp, the impunity of power. Now, the problem which Nigeria, and I have no doubt a lot of other jurisdictions face typically in dealing with the issue of corruption is that when you have people who have been vested with power, with authority, who are supposed to be the ones to act on behalf of the people, on behalf of a community, on behalf of citizens, to ensure that that which is the means of survival, is the means for economic renewal and regeneration, that they're able to protect these things. When they become rogue and the power which they have begins to get into their heads, it brings about this particular distorted situation that we're talking about, where corruption itself then begins to fan the flame or the embers of impunity. And there is a lot of impunity within the Nigerian state. Now, the expression draining the swamp, well, Donald Trump in his first run for office used it quite a lot. And he used it, well, he wasn't the one who coined the phrase. That phrase had been used for quite a number of years before Donald Trump. But Donald Trump gave it some sort of flair. And he was emphasizing what he was going to do then in his first run for office, where he was going to take head on what he felt was the entrenched institutional malpractices in Washington, D.C., which was making it impossible, in his estimation then, for the government to run the way it is supposed, to run. And that is something we equally need to see here in, Nigeria, a draining of the swamp, an insistence on transparency at every level of doing business within the oil and gas sector, not just the oil and gas sector that we're talking about here, because from our definition of corruption that we saw in our earlier slide that World Bank has given, corruption is something which is capable of cutting across every sector, every industry within any country itself. Next slide, please, Aaron. So the areas where you will find quite a huge challenge in dealing with corruption, especially in the oil and gas sector, which is not the only place where this thing persists. There is corruption in the telecommunications sector, there is corruption in the agricultural sector, there is corruption in the solid minerals sector, there is corruption in the customs sector, there is corruption in the immigration sector. So everywhere you look at, there is that challenge of people wanting to use their office, to abuse their office in order to gain some financial advantage, or to put a price on the political powers that they have in order to engage in acts of patronage. So for the oil and gas sector that we've been talking about for some time now, there are very key areas where we see corruption in full bloom, and those are areas where investors need to be a lot circumspect about when they come into Nigeria. The award of oil and exploration, oil exploration and production licenses, the award of contracts within the industry, there are bottlenecks and inefficiencies in government-company relations, bunkering, the theft of oil, which is what I have been talking about for some minutes now, the allocation of licenses for exporting crude and importing refined products. And on this very last point, it is sad to say that because of the very opaque nature of the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, there is little or no information on a lot of very key and important indices as to what is going on. How much crude do we even produce within a month? Apart from what OPEC has asked us to do, how much crude is exported out of the country? How much do you get when you do your crude swaps, when you're importing refined petroleum product, gasoline or petrol, as we call it here, into the country? How much do you actually import into the country? And nobody seems to know. Even the people who are responsible, the professionals, experts who shall have knowledge about these things, they tell you we don't know. Whether that is a frank statement or it is a cheeky attempt to evade the question and to deflect it so that further questions will not follow, it's something which one is not able to speak definitively on. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so I'm sure some of you here might know that popular phrase which was, made quite famous by Lord Acton, where he talked about power corrupting, and absolute power corrupting absolutely. And there is no other place that we see this happening than in the oil and gas sector and in some of these other sectors that I have mentioned. Let me just spend a few seconds on the oil and gas in the sector, because that itself is like the poster child, is like the template for what you see in other sectors. So in the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, where there is so much corruption at different levels in different areas, you have a president who doesn't have any specific experience in oil and gas matters. He's never worked in an oil and gas exploration and production company. He doesn't know how the business is run, but he's the president of a country, and then he's also doubling as a minister of petroleum resources. That in itself is a recipe for confusion within the system. And then you have a deputy petroleum minister who, again, doesn't have any formal training in energy matters, in oil and gas matters, has no experience whatsoever in this particular area, and he sits there as the minister or the deputy minister, who is supposed to be the administrative head of the petroleum resources ministry itself. Well, one might say, oh, well, he doesn't really need to have any hands-on experience in oil and gas matters. He definitely would have professionals within the industry who are able to show him, the ropes and teach him how to do things. But that is not how things work within organized or developed societies. You must have people who have the requisite experience, the requisite knowledge of the sector, of the industry, in charge of those areas. When you do not have that, you open up those sectors for the possibility of corrupting influences, which is what we are looking at today. Now, another problem about this issue of power corrupting is that because you have invested power in individuals, you've given them control of certain sectors and certain industries and certain ministries. These individuals feel untouchable. They feel that they are a law unto themselves. And that one institution, that one organ of government, which is meant to act as a check on the other arms of government, becomes what you might refer to as a lame duck. The judiciary is disregarded. The judiciary is poorly funded. The judges literally have to beg for their salaries. In very recently, this year, the justices of the Supreme Court, the foremost court in the land, had to leak a letter of protest which they had written to the Chief Justice of the nation, where they were complaining bitterly about their conditions of service. And you wonder, where you're trying to ensure that corruption does not entrench itself and does not become the ordinary way of doing business within any country, and the judiciary that is supposed to be the arbiter, that is supposed to be impartial, that is supposed to be the custodian of all that is good and all that is lawful and legal, itself is protesting because it is so poorly funded and very poorly regarded. It causes corruption to thrive because it then exposes the judiciary to a lot of influences and negative influences by political office holders who might want to use them to achieve their political ends, which usually is done in a very corrupt and unlawful manner. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so the story goes on. As we've seen from the previous slide, the president is the Minister of Petroleum Resources. The deputy Minister of Petroleum Resources has no requisite knowledge or skills. The judiciary, which is supposed to be the impartial arbiter and is to ensure that corruption, money laundering, bribery, financing of terrorism, and illicit flow of funds, and all the other associated ills and crimes are dealt with, do not have the requisite support or funding. And within the government agencies themselves, that ordinarily one would expect that there should be cooperation. There is interagency conflicts, there is lack of cooperation, and nepotism is a real problem in Nigeria, which fuels this whole a problem of corruption because a lot of things are done based on ethnic, tribal, religious affiliations or leanings, which are all very potent forces that gives corruption such a very strong hold and footing in any country. Next slide, please, Aaron. So and it continues. The corruption conundrum, like I have described it, here. A fractured country and divided loyalties, lack of objectivity, the fight against corruption, the fight against money laundering, the fight against illicit flow of funds and financing of terrorism, which is supposed to be carried out in an objective manner, becomes colored and becomes tainted by such considerations of the tribe, the ethnic background, the religious background of individuals who are alleged to be involved in these unlawful and unhealthy and condemnable, acts. Again, last point that you see on the slide, point 9, takes us back to what I had referred to, the disregard for the judiciary, a poor sentencing procedure. Sometimes the judges do not just have the necessary inspiration to do anything at all, because their working condition, it's simply put, quite hellish and untenable. Next slide, please, Aaron. So thank you very much, Aaron. So it continues. The lack of independence of prosecuting agencies, you're fighting corruption, and particular people who are involved in corrupt practices. They are the ones who appoint the head of the agencies that are to fight corruption itself, which these individuals are perpetrating and which these individuals are involved in. They are the ones who approve your particular budget. They are the ones to approve your expenditure profile. It just makes the whole process, quite ridiculous in a very remarkable and fascinating way. So such things can only be done effectively where there is manifest and visible independence on the part of the agencies that are responsible for fighting these needs. And then I've talked about the politicization of the whole process itself, which could, when you do experience these things, could be quite disheartening. And again, lack of diligent prosecution, because the agencies that are supposed to be ensuring that these things are dealt with in accordance with the laws, in accordance with the myriads of legislations that we have, in place, are not even able to do this for diverse reasons. One of which is the lack of adequate funding, or just total lack of inspiration on their part. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes. So the issue of money laundering, which I have touched on in the course of my discussion, and these are twin evils. These are twin ills. These are intertwined in most unpleasant way. Wherever corruption is, money laundering, it's not too far, away, because the proceeds of corrupt acts would have to be laundered or washed or cleaned in some shape, or form. Please, next slide, Aaron. Yes, and just a quick run through, of some of the areas in which people in Nigeria try to hide these proceeds of crime so that they cannot be traced. It's not the whole list, just a few that I have just put up there for your consideration. Next slide, please, Aaron. So money laundering itself, as I'm sure most of us on the webinar here will attest to, it's a huge problem. In 2020 alone, it was estimated that between 800 million and $2 trillion was, laundered by criminals, and banks were hit with 10.4 billion in fines for money laundering. And Nigeria has in recent times also seen an upsurge in this, problem. Like I said at the very beginning, there are kidnappings that goes on, and money is paid in cash. Hardly would you find a kidnapper giving you a bank account for you to pay into. Whoever does that shows that they are quite not, they're new in the game itself, and they will ask you for cash, to bring the cash, because they would not want to be traced. A lot of unscrupulous politicians who have been able to corner monies which are meant for the communities and for the electorates and for those who voted them into power. They have been able to withdraw through various means cash from, accounts, and all these things are stashed. Just this month, November, that we're in, the Basel Institute on Governance, said that Nigeria is a high risk for money laundering and terrorist, financing, placing Nigeria 17th in a list of 128, countries. So what is Nigeria doing lately to address these menace of money laundering? Next slide, please, Aaron. Sorry. So, for those who are abreast with going-ons in Nigeria, events in Nigeria, you will have noted that sometime in October, the Central Bank of Nigeria came up with a bold initiative to redesign the higher denomination notes of the Nigerian currency. And the main driver for that decision by the central bank was because it judged that nearly 84% of the 12.7 trillion naira in circulation was outside the banking system. So it was clear that a lot of this money, which is circulating, has gotten out of the system through unscrupulous means. Monies are being laundered. And so the CBN then took that particular decision, which has its critics and which has those who appraise of it for being, a proactive and thinking out of the box. The CBN said we're going to redesign the naira. Now, what this decision to redesign the naira has done, or one of the immediate effects of this, is that it has upset tremendously those who have laundered money, those who have illegal stash of funds, those who have money outside of the banking system. Well, this is not to say that everyone who has money outside the banking system is laundering money, because people do take money out of the system for various reasons, to have cash flows at hand in case of emergencies. Nigeria is aiming at a cashless society. It hasn't yet gotten to that point. Hopefully, it will arrive at that point very soon. But it had the immediate effect of ensuring that those who have laundered money are then scrambling to try and dispose of these monies by buying up foreign exchange in the market. And that then had the ripple effect of depreciating Nigeria's currency tremendously. Next slide, please, Aaron. I have to brace through a number of these things. So I mentioned that already. Thank you. Next slide, Aaron. Yes, and corruption always fights back. And I'm sure we all will agree with that. In whatever jurisdiction you might find yourself in, when you begin to attack corruption in its various shape or form, the people who are benefiting from it, the people who are getting advantages from it, will surely fight back. And that has been done in the case of Nigeria, where some are trying to use the National Assembly to put a stop to the plan to redesign the naira, to give more time before the currencies which are currently stashed outside the system becomes no longer legal, tenders. But the good news is that the Nigerian president has thrown his weight behind this plan, because he himself believes that it will address to an extent the problem of illegally procured monies. Next slide, Ms. Aaron. So we mentioned this, so I will not spend that much time, on this. The problems Nigeria faces in the fight against corruption and the need for blind justice, a justice which does not look this way or that way, which deals with every matter that comes before it in an impartial and objective, manner. So it takes us back to a number of the points I've mentioned earlier. Next slide, Ms. Aaron, thank you. So you will see those points again, a walk in the maze. It's always such a mazy affair when you're discussing corruption and money laundering and financing of terrorism in Nigeria. And so these are highlights of the things that needs to be looked at, or that are being looked at in addressing these issues. Next slide, Ms. Aaron. So it continues, the walking in the maze, and so those are highlights of things that needs to be done, that needs to be addressed, that being addressed in order to ensure that we have a much more saner and a much more stable business environment within which investors can have full comfort and confidence in doing business. Next slide, please, Aaron. And the good thing as I round up, this webinar is to announce that there has been some remarkable strides and, achievements on the part of the prosecuting agencies in dealing with some of these much more notorious incidents of corruption and money laundering and whatnot. So this slide's just outlines to you a number of these prominent cases which has been brought, before the courts, and for which there has been some impartial, objective decisions at the end of the day. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so it still continues again. The notable decisions that you might want to look up to give you the comfort and confidence that it's not business as usual, even though there might be a few hiccups here and there, a few setbacks, a few hitches, but some progress is being made in this fight against corruption and other related ills. Next slide, please, Aaron. So this is just, again, like a news alert. You can look at that more closely in your own time. A problem of online scams and all that remains an endemic problem in Nigeria. Internet fraudsters are still very much around. The enforcement agencies, especially the EFCC, does a lot of prosecution of these individuals, arrest and prosecution of these individuals, but whilst not in any way minimizing what they do, they are the low-hanging fruits. They are lower-level criminals, although their crime has victims, as all crime, does. Next slide, please, Aaron. So this is just, some helpful hints on how to avoid being a victim of these online crime in a world that has become so digitalized, and we're all in one small global village, the metaverse that they're trying to get us into. Next slide, please, Aaron. I'm sure we're almost at the home run. So just again, in conclusion, some very practical things that businesses need to do to ensure that you are not caught unawares when you are venturing into an economy as attractive, as alluring, as rewarding, as productive as the Nigerian economy is. So it's at this point I say, next slide, Aaron. Thank you very much for your time. And I hope that you've been able to pick one or two things.
Thank you very much, Fred. A really insightful webinar. We really appreciate your time today. I think that we should try and do a bit of a Q&A. We have a few questions that have come in from the audience. So Fred, if you're happy, I'll ask one question that has come through. We still have a number of people with us, so thank you for staying with us throughout. Fred, this question comes from Olu, and they ask, have there been reasonable ethical grounds for money laundering from the side of a defendant when a case gets to court, or has the law made room for grey areas regarding what laundered money was ultimately used for?
Thank you very much. Brilliant question from Oni. The good news is that it is not just a case of the prosecution always winning when they take accused defendants to court. We do have a number of cases in Nigeria where the court has dismissed the charges of money laundering brought against our defendants because the law is very clear. You must be able to establish that that individual who is accused of laundering money did that willfully, intentionally. He knew that the monies that was coming into his account were the proceeds of crime. Now, there are a number of instances where the prosecuting authorities are not able to establish that. And the court says, look, get out of my face. You just can't drag people here because you have the power to do so. So the good thing to know is that it is a balanced setting that we have here in Nigeria, where the evidence supports the court to decide on, decided in favor of the prosecution, they do so. And where the evidence is weighed in favor of the defendant, the court, has often asked for funds that have been seized to be returned back to the account of the individual. One such happened just last week, where the court sentenced the head of the prosecuting agency to prison for failing to comply with their order that funds belonging to a defendant should be released back to the defendant. And they did that promptly because the embarrassment of having the head of the prosecuting agency spending a month in prison would have been totally embarrassing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that answer, Fred. I'm sure that's answered your question, Olu, but we do encourage you to get in touch if you need any further information from Fred. But thank you very much once again, Fred, for that fascinating webinar. Plenty of insights for our audience to get their teeth into. And thank you very much to you for joining us today. I hope we can see you again soon for another webinar very shortly. But for now, have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much, everyone. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you, Aaron, and all the Mondac team. Do have a pleasant evening, or morning, or afternoon, wherever you might be. Goodbye.
Goodbye.